Hello, everybody. Our Minister for the Interior, Horst Seehofer, has created a council to combat Islamophobia. It is called the Independent Expert Council Against Islamophobia, Unabhängiger Expertenkreis Muslimfeindlichkeit, UEM. And as the name suggests, it is supposed to present itself as independent from the government, which of course it isn't. It's created by the Ministry of the Interior, dependent on taxpayer money, and the 12 members are handpicked. Among them are well-known names of activists who, are in this victim signaling business. Every Muslim is basically a victim. And this is the purpose of the council to begin with. They are supposed to create the impression that Muslims are in a Third Reich situation, that an upcoming Holocaust is just awaiting them. And I'm reading to you the announcement, or one sentence of the announcement from the ministry's homepage. So you can see the job description of these people. It reads, the UEM, that is the council, is to analyze the changing forms of Islamophobia and research the overlaps with anti-Semitic attitudes, as well as other forms of group-oriented hostility towards human beings. And I will spend this entire video just discussing this one sentence because it combines so many things that go wrong in this country that I have to unpack it for you a bit. So first of all, the hostilities towards human beings, the word they use here is Menschenfeindlichkeit, and what troubles me is the word Mensch first. I mean, actually there are a lot of things, but I'm totally annoyed by now by the use of the word Mensch. You probably know that it is a Yiddish word, usually has a lot of positive connotations. It means a person of integrity, a true Mensch, a good person. And it has developed over the past years in the propaganda in Germany from a word that in German does not actually mean a positive human being, but the neutral term for a human being to a replacement for any identifier for a group member. You probably heard a lot of conservatives, particularly in the English-speaking world, saying that there is too much identity politics going on, and this is of course a part of the parcel here. But at the same time, these people don't admit that they are playing on identities. So what we had in the past years was the replacement of identifiers of group members, like I don't know, any group member at this point. It's not policemen, it's human beings in uniform, Mensch in uniform. It's not I don't know, trade unionist, employer, a Jew, a Muslim, or any person. No, it's just human being with human being that. And this is very prominent in my favorite newspaper, which is most ideologically pure, in Zeit, where you have this phrase all the time, people who are young. And this totally riles me up. And this entire phrase, hostility towards human beings, or group-oriented hostility towards human beings, has a history of its own. And that is that it was created for the so-called Mitte-Studie. The Mitte-Studie was a series of studies that painted the center of society. That's why it's called Mitte, middle study, the center of society, your average citizen, and decidedly your average citizen in the most vicious terms. So you are painted as a racist, a fascist, a Nazi, and the claim of the study had been that your average citizen wants the Third Reich back in one way or another. They would not say it as explicitly because they are dishonest people at their very core. But the idea really was to use questionnaires with ambiguous questions to paint your average citizen, and that's important, your average citizen as a Nazi. And The trick was, of course, that the questions are interpreted, or I just assigned the label, or the answers to the potential answers are just assigned to the label Nazi, no matter how down to earth or reasonable they are. An example for that type of question would be, do you think it is disgusting that two homosexuals kiss in the streets? And the answer belongs to the person you ask for, because that's a natural sentiment. I would say most men actually have. It's just a feeling, right? And a feeling cannot be stopped. So we are measuring honesty here, and the more honest people are about what they actually feel, the more this is interpreted as if this person was out to stop homosexuals from kissing in the streets. That's not what happens. People just feel disgusted a bit, and that's natural, because we have these instincts for a reason. We are supposed to procreate, actually. I suppose that for some parts of our history, some diseases may have also spread through the populations through homosexual interactions, but particularly between men. A very common practice involves your bowel. So over millions of years, pathogens have come and gone, which we don't know of anymore, that could be transmissible through your bowel. And so that might be the reason why men just naturally feel a thing that can be used against them now in this anti-manliness craze that we are in right now, the toxic masculinity nonsense. And also to paint your average person, and this is important, your average person, as a Nazi. This university that produces the study, the University of Leipzig, used to be the center of the Marxist propaganda in the Communist East. The journalism department of that organization used to be called the Red Monastery, for the reason that the most ideologically pure people were let inside, and only those. So this is a very tainted university, and they have created this terminology of group-oriented hostility towards Mensch. And of course, the logic is that they want to use the strong sentiments which we feel towards Nazism for any group. So it's no longer against, it's no longer hostility against Jews, but they want to protect actually the pet groups of the elites. They want to advance one group, and they want to use the protection that was necessary right after the war for some period for some groups. Also the Roma, the homosexuals, but the homosexuals were not getting it, right? But should have. At the time, right after the war, where there was real hostility going on still in this country, these protections were necessary, and the sentiments about those protections are now used to be generalized, and actually only generalized for the purpose of advancing some groups, because you can still, of course, show an incredible amount of hostility towards the French, the British, the American, the Polish, the Israelis, a lot of groups. And I've just mentioned some ethnicities. You could also go through the military, the police, and so forth. So there are a lot of groups that should have some protection, like every group should have some protection, but that sentiment that some groups need a particular protection, as was the case with the Jews right after the war and with the Roma right after the war, that this should be applied to some groups only, that the left wants to advance, while most groups, no matter how harsh the attacks are actually not protected by this sentiment anymore. And of course, this is not only built on communist things, and it's also not only inspired by the East Coast identity stuff and deconstructionalism, Judith Butler style of academics. This is also based on a mistake we've probably made for many decades now, and this is that we have banned certain discussions, and we've come up with a very strange morality of what should be avoided or what should be learned from the Third Reich. And the most general approach that is exploited here is that you cannot discuss generalizations of groups. We have now to pretend that groups don't have any characteristic whatsoever, and this makes democracy impossible, because if you want to find the needs of any group or the threats from any group or any characteristics, if you want to adjust your politics, your policies to the needs and threats of and from any group, you have to find the characteristics of it. It's impossible to talk about the police, the military, the trade unionists, the employees, the employers, and so forth, if you cannot talk about typical characteristics. You will always have outliners, no matter what you say. But if you ban the generalization of any group, you ultimately ban democracy in itself. And this is not how we can continue. We have to revise the way we think about racism and about anti-Semitism. And of course, the left rather wants the opposite. They want to use the generalization, as I said, for their specific pet groups only. And they don't want you to revise if that was a good idea to not generalize in the first place, and what generalizations are worthwhile. And I spoke about a revision that is necessary of the way we fight anti-Semitism and other unjust and unfair hostilities towards groups, because every group, of course, needs some level of protection, and what we are asking for, and what we should ask for, is, of course, a fair treatment and a fair morality, so that all groups can live together in a peaceful manner. And I want to read the first part again of that sentence to make that point. The UEM, that is that council, is to analyze the changing forms of Islamophobia and research the overlaps with anti-Semitic attitudes. So there is a specific wish of these people to exploit anti-Semitism. So they have noticed that our understanding of what constitutes anti-Semitism has changed. In the past, it used to be about, let's say, facial traits. If somebody says, this is this guy with a long nose and the lips and deep eyes, whatever. If somebody had spoken about typical facial traits, which, by the way, are not unique to Jews and are also not universal to Jews, but are shared first and foremost by a lot of Arabs from the same area, where Jews originate, from the Middle Eastern area. These traits could not be discussed right after the Second World War, because anti-Semitism at the time was very based on this idea that the genome, the genetics of Jews were somewhat inferior to the genetics of anybody else. This has gone through the door anyway. Nobody actually believes in this for genetics nonsense anymore. And instead, anti-Semitism, this excessive hostility towards Jews, has now taken different battlegrounds. Like, people pretend to be concerned about things that they associate with Jews, be it banks, be it Israel, be it religion as such, which is bad except for Islam then, and so forth. So there are a number of things they identify as typically Jewish, and therefore they try to fight Jews by just talking about them in a pseudo-objective way. And here's the thing, and this is also the key why anti-Semitism, or our perception of anti-Semitism, has changed, as they have noticed when they say the changing forms of Islamophobia, because they want to piggyback on that idea that Jews also don't stick to their definition of what is anti-Semitism. And the reason is that we actually fight unfair criticism and unfair hostility towards Jews. And this fairness thing is a difficult thing to communicate. It is easier to say, you must not say, I don't know, there are too many Jews in Hollywood or whatever. So if you address this with a qualitative approach, so not to speak about access and, I don't know, the gradient of the problems, when is there an access and when is it still in the range of normal. But if you want to qualitatively exclude entire topics and ban conversations about this or that or markers and certain proposals and certain words, if you identify such things as anti-Semitic and use these things as identifiers, you have the problem that these people are jumping very, very quickly between the topics, and also that sometimes they are so convincing that you are actually dealing with a person using all the wrong anti-Semitic or what you identify as anti-Semitic words, arguments, tropes, and so forth. And these people in themselves, they are not anti-Semites. They're just talking like the person who came up with this nonsense, who are anti-Semites. But you can no longer distinguish the two. You can no longer tell who isn't a true anti-Semite, and who is just talking like one. This makes it difficult, and we kind of have to, I think, address this whole thing by fighting them on the battleground that they choose. For example, if they like to talk about Israel, then talk about Israel, because Israel in itself is the outpost of the Western world. It is the outpost of freedom, and it is the frontier that helps us defy Islamism and totalitarianism as such. So as such, Israel is worth of defense, and it does not need you to identify your attacker as an anti-Semite, because he will look over his shoulder. He will not admit that he is, and sometimes he isn't even. He's just somebody who was convinced. So what you can do is, for example, if you take Israel, you can talk about what these people actually want to do with the Arabs that live in the contested territories that's now called the West Bank in the Western media, and Judea and Samaria in Israel. What do they plan to do with these people? What kind of independence do they need? Do they actually want to stop trade with Israel? Do they think they can live in an autark lifestyle without the assistance of Jews? Is that what they want, or do they want equal access to things? So that's the exact opposite. So they want a perfect integration into Israel. What is the thing they actually want? Do they want an elected government that is accountable to them? And then you very quickly run into what stops them from having the things they want for these people. So you don't run into the problem of having to debate the history, because conflicts of the past are even more difficult to side with and to pick apart than conflicts of today. And it is already very difficult, as you know right now, to see who is right in today's conflicts. It's a difficult thing to do. And your third-party onlooker won't have the knowledge to decide these arguments. So just redirect the conversations from these historical topics back to, okay, guy, what do you actually want to be done? How does it actually help what people? So this is an example of how the strategy must change. And this identifying an axis is very difficult to communicate, but we have to kind of learn it. And the way to expose your opponent is to kind of let them speak about what they actually want. If it comes to the specifics, they usually demask themselves. That was it for today, and I'll see you soon. Bye.